Thanks, Chair. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today. Can I ask, do you have handy the Q1 14 figures on the legal repossession? So we have the figure of 5,810 for Q4 of last year. Do you have that figure for Q1 of this year?
No, because it's still subject to audit by the Central Bank and Ernst & Young.
Okay. Can you give an indication? We were at, say, 5,800 at 31st of December. Roughly, what are we talking in addition?
Roughly the same.
Roughly the same. It hasn't gone up considerably. Okay, thank you.
There's only an increase, a relatively modest increase from September last year. As we said last time we appeared before you, we thought there'd be a focus on legal action at the beginning, and then it would relatively stay flat, and that's been our experience.
Okay, thanks. Do you have a figure within the bank for the estimated number of possessions that are likely to occur based on all of these court or legal proceedings?
I think from our perspective, it's too early to say. We have seen 50% of the cases re-engage with us. If we look at other markets, and who knows whether this will apply here or not, but generally speaking, you should end up with something around 70-75% of cases where legal action has been initiated, where people will re-engage.
And Mr. Brown, can I infer from that that you would expect, obviously we don't know, but that you would expect that 25 to 30% will end up in possession by the bank then?
I think that's a reasonable expectation. Just follow the maths. That's a reasonable expectation. It's also a reasonable expectation if the other assumption is if they don't engage with us. As I mentioned earlier, if they engage, we think there's probably a solution. But if there's no engagement, we have no choice but to go through the court process, and that could be the end result.
Okay. So on those figures, it would be reasonable for me to infer that you believe, let's say on a base of 6,000, roughly, which is rounding for the maths, that about 1,500 to 1,600 would end up in possession. The banks would take possession of the homes.
If they don't re-engage, yes.
Yeah, I think we've put a potential range of between 1,000 and 1,500 being the likely end state if we don't get a substantial change in engagement patterns from customers.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask, why are there so few offers on the buy-to-let portfolio? So the figures we have of the 1,680 proposed solutions, less than 200 of those do not involve legal proceedings. Why is it so low?
Relatively little interest in the mortgage holder on the buy-to-let property, because I think they've seen that there is no gain at the end of the process, and therefore they're more than happy in many instances just to let the rent receiver be appointed and go through that process. We've had very little expression of interest in alternative solutions.
Would Ulster Bank be happy to offer
Absolutely.
on buy-to-let in the same way as it is for the family home?
We're very, very keen to engage with anybody providing they can make reasonable payment, yes.
Thank you. Am I right in thinking that the mortgage arrears department has been moved to Scotland?
Part of it, as Jim mentioned in an earlier question, we have approximately 200 people of the 450 involved in the whole process are based in a building in Edinburgh, yes. But they're exclusively working for Ulster Bank Ireland Limited.
So how many staff do you have in the Republic who are available to sit down face-to-face with borrowers?
We have a field force of around 80 people who are spread across the Republic who will make themselves available either at the customer's home or the local branch. We found that to be a very useful additional capability. We increased that number recently because we were finding there was a reasonable amount of demand, but certainly not sufficient demand for it to be more than that sort of 80 number. We're able to cover all the visits and meetings that we need.
I think it's important to point out that the reason why we employed the 200 people in or thereabouts in Scotland is that the pool of experienced collectors available in the Republic was very small, and the people that were employed there generally have 4 to 5 years experience, so they're very familiar with discussing the situation with people who are in financial arrears. They know how to handle that. As a result of that, along with the solutions that we've put in place, we've seen a significant reduction in arrears over the last 12 months. But I think having an operation in Edinburgh has been an important part of that. The other key point is that they are only handling the early arrears up to 90 days. It's the people on the ground in the Republic that handle the longer arrears.
Thank you. And are you satisfied that customers in arrears in the Republic do have reasonable access to a person to sit down face to face? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Can I just go back to the PIA for a minute? Am I right in thinking that Ulster Bank would veto any PIA that included a proposal to write down part of the secured debt?
It's hard to imagine a case where we would have to write down the secured debt. So I'm not avoiding the question. We just think that if you look at the average borrower who is paying €1 on their mortgage, 60 cents on the unsecured debt, the solution in our view is write down the unsecured debt and then restructure the loan.
I understand.
And it won't involve having to write down the mortgage.
But if we do use our imagination, if a PIP proposed as a part of a PIA, write down a proposed debt, would Ulster Bank veto that proposal?
We have a very active negotiation with personal insolvency practitioners, so it's not a question that they make a single proposal which we have to veto. We often have several conversations about what might be a more appropriate structure. What we've experienced so far is that when the final proposal comes through from the personal insolvency practitioner, there is no reference to secured debt.
Because they know that you won't accept it. Let me ask the question in a different way.
Because it's not necessary to solve the problem.
Well, in your opinion. Let me ask the question in a different way. Would Ulster Bank ever accept a PIA that had a mortgage write-down as part of the proposal?
We don't see the reason why you would have to.
No, I know that, but just if you could just answer that question, it's a simple yes.
My short answer would be no. But we will.
I understand the caveats. I just wanted to get confirmation on that. There's only been one mortgage to rent. Can I ask you? I think the mortgage to rent is a difficult process. Do you ever refuse? Have you refused customers asking for mortgage to rent?
No.
Is there anything that could be done? Is there anything obvious that could be done to the scheme which would make it more attractive for your customers and for the bank?
I think with a sample of one, it's kind of difficult for us to draw any conclusions. But now we have actually finished one. We are looking at the whole process and saying, what could we do to have made it faster or better?
Okay. Are there any other solutions? So we've asked for specific solutions here. Are there any other solutions that Ulster Bank is considering that it would like to share with the committee?
So I think, Debbie, if you look on the right-hand side here, there are a range of solutions that we have in place because we don't only just deal with those that are 90 days in arrears or more. Part of the success in our arrears reducing has been by being proactive on the early arrears as well. So there's a wide range of options that we've outlined there. But there are a couple of others that Stephen had mentioned earlier that we're looking at as well for some of the longer term arrears.
There are, and I think it's also we're looking at what we can offer to customers who are not in arrears to address their problems as well. So I think what we've said throughout is that the way we handle the mortgage arrears issue has to be consistent with how we're trying to manage the mortgage market on a go-forward basis. So we are looking at products we might be able to offer to customers who are currently up to date that might make their life easier. As Jim Ryan mentioned, we are looking at things like negative equity reporting and things of that nature. The products that we described to the Chairman's earlier question, looking at those longer-term solutions where a deferred element of the debt might go beyond retirement age, so we don't have to create this sustainability crisis for a customer who otherwise can afford to stay in their home, but because of an arbitrary decision about retirement age, we're forced to take certain action. So we're looking at all those things as well.
Thank you. One of the complaints that I hear quite often, particularly from the groups that came in last week who are helping the mortgage holders, is that when the banks make an offer, they're under no obligation to explain why they've made an offer, and don't typically. The customer simply gets quite a complex letter. Can I ask, when Ulster Bank makes offers.
Eames, can you turn off your phone, please? Or just leave the room, because I'm getting interference up here. And
My apologies.
So either turn it off or leave
There's
the room,
no
please.
problem.
Okay.
It's
Deputy Donnelly, please.
Can I ask, when Ulster Bank makes an offer of a restructure, does it make choices? Does it, for example, say, actually, we think one of the following 2 or 3 might work for you, or does it make one specific offer? And does it, when it makes that set of choices or single offer, does it offer an explanation in writing as to why it has come to those offers?
Yeah. So probably 2 aspects of that. We would never offer a single solution, because it's important that the customer can look at various options. So as I mentioned earlier, the economic concession and the split mortgage often go hand in hand to say which one of these makes most sense to you. For anything that involves a longer term solution, anything that's going to be over 36 months, we do support the scheme whereby customers can take independent advice at our expense to satisfy themselves that they're making the right choice about it. So we would be very keen not to steer somebody towards a particular outcome, but let them see the range of options. And I mentioned to an earlier question, in the event the customer felt that the option we'd given them wasn't right, they do have the right of appeal through the MOP if they felt that we could have offered them something different, and that does often result in us reconsidering if appropriate.
Thank you.
I think
Grace there, Deputy Donnelly, if you want to just...
Thanks.
Just to add, Deputy, I think we go at great pains to make sure that the loans are understood when we put them in place, because the other key thing that we monitor from our perspective is how many people go onto arrangements and then subsequently break those arrangements further down the track. It's not in their interest or our interests for that to happen. So we do take quite a bit of time to make sure we get the customer the right solution.
Okay, and just to the question on, do you offer an explanation as to why you have decided? So let's say you write to somebody and you say, look, we think you can get out of this through an economic concession or a split mortgage. Do you say, and here's why?
We would typically have that dialogue by telephone. So what we found, one of the key elements of what we do is we try to do as much there and then on the phone with the customer, because it's a very stressful experience being in arrears. And the idea of having an endless exchange of correspondence over numerous weeks while the customer's asked to gather up proofs and utility bills and bank statements, we just don't think is the right answer. So we would have an open dialogue and discussion with the customer. But in order to provide protection to the customers, we have got full call recording capability in all of our sites, so that if ever there's a dispute, we can play back the details and make sure we were as transparent as we hope to be.
Thank you. Final question then. It comes back to the example the Chair raised, and also the question that Deputy Doherty raised, which was, the Chair raised the point that you potentially will write down quite a substantial amount of debt once it has been recategorized from mortgage debt to unsecured debt as part of a residual, right? So the example given was, let's say they owe 250,000, they can't afford to pay that. The house is sold for 150,000, leaving a residual of 100,000, which Ulster Bank may then say, we're going to write that off as unsecured debt. And if I understand the answer to that correctly, the answer is that you couldn't foresee a situation in which that would need to happen, because there is a range of solutions available to keep them in the house. Is that correct?
Yes, so our average mortgage is 164,000 euros. So we're not talking about 250, 300,000 euro situations. The average amount of unsecured credit that our customers are carrying who are in arrears is about 11,500 euros. But because that is at a much higher, much more profitable interest rate for the unsecured lenders over a much shorter period, the unsecured credit is usually the thing that creates the financial pinch point for the customer. So in all the situations we've seen so far, by dealing with the unsecured credit and taking that burden away from the customer, our share of restructuring the remaining debt does not require any write-down.
If that's the case, then the one thing that puzzles me is, why would anyone voluntarily surrender the house? Which I think was the question at the crux of what was being asked earlier on.
It's difficult for us to answer the question. Certainly we've agreed we'll come back and provide further analysis of those 120 cases. I mean, 99.5% of our 90-plus customers haven't chosen to do that, and 0.5% have.
And you're comfortable that even in the case where they have chosen to do that, there were workable solutions offered by Ulster Bank which would have kept them in the house and afforded them a reasonable standard of living?
we would be confident that given the size of our average balance, there should be no reason why that would have been necessary. But there would be often personal circumstances why the customer might choose to do that.
Thank you.